Hey, welcome to the live stream today. I'm so glad you're on. Richard, it's cool to see you on. Chris, thanks for joining. And we're going to jump into some cool stuff here, geeking out about tablature specifically. So if you're joining the live, let me know where you're coming from. I always love to see where people are in the world. And if you're joining as part of the replay crew, let me know as well. And also, I'm interested to know what everyone's experience is with tablature, because I'm going to be talking about tablature, or tab for short, in the guitar world. It's such a ubiquitous thing. Tablature is so common. It's presented as often the option when you first get into guitar, that it's really important to touch on. And the name of this live stream is The Problem with Tablature. And there are multiple problems, actually. It can do the job depending on what your ultimate goal is. So, hey, John, it's cool to see you on from Ocala, Florida. Very cool. With tablature, if your goal is to merely play the guitar, to perform a song, then it can be awesome, because it lowers the barrier to entry, gets you up and running really, really fast, which is awesome. The downside is when it comes to understanding music, it really doesn't do much, if anything, for you. And this channel is all about theory for songwriting, music theory for songwriting, with the ultimate goal of creating and expressing your own art. And so that's where tablature becomes a problem. So just to kind of preface it that way, because if you just want to play and jump in and play, it's very alluring and can be very appealing, because, like I say, it gets you up and running fast. But it's like the old easy hard or hard easy. With tablature, it's easy to jump in, low barrier to entry, and then it becomes a slog for the rest of your life, frankly. Or it can be hard to understand theory. Understand shouldn't have been in air quotes, to really just learn theory. And once you get through that learning curve, it's easy and enjoyable and downright wonderful for the rest of your life. So it's one thing to say that tablature has problems, and if you're into music theory, or if you've kind of like struggled with tablature, you may have had this instinctive sense. I did for the longest time. I felt this kind of visceral repulsion to tablature, and I didn't know why. I couldn't put my finger on it for the longest time. I knew that it was like not really helping me understand theory to the point where I could really come up with songs that made sense, that I could like really come up with some great stuff. But I didn't know why, what the limitation was, why tablature was tripping me up, frankly. So let's talk through some of those issues and find out what is going on. And hey, Richard, cool to see you on. Chris, Dave, Gary K, and Broken Home in Dallas, Texas. Very cool. Thank you for being on. So what's up with tablature? I'm going to share my screen here. And when it comes to really wanting to understand music, the number one mistake is starting with tablature. And why is that? So let's look at some diagrams and really dissect it. Let's geek out on this, because it can save you years of pain. So the basic structure of tablature is, it's kind of like notation. It's kind of like music notation, in that from left to right, the song progresses through time, or anything that tablature is showing progresses through time. And the way that it's designed, you probably know tablature, but just for those who maybe don't, fret numbers are illustrated using Arabic numerals, and these horizontal lines represent strings. So, if I were to place a 3 right here, that means that I should play the 3rd fret on the 5th string. This is the 5th string. Or this note is the 8th fret on the 2nd string, and so on. So by placing different notes on these string lines, it tells you, it's like very direct. It's very intuitive, frankly, like, oh, press this string on this fret and I will produce that note. And then, play this sequence of notes, and without having to learn notation, it is like you're in business. Like you're making music, and it sounds It can sound good. So like I say, it's like music notation. And some of these phrases I use are not meant to be inflammatory, but it's just kind of how it is. Tablature is kind of like the poor man's notation in that it is a low barrier to entry. It's more intuitive than all of these esoteric medieval symbols, but they're one and the same. Or to say it in reverse, notation is glorified tablature. Notation has its problems too. And in my music theory course, part 3 goes into a lot of detail about the issues with notation, which share some of the same problems with tablature, but tablature takes the problems to the next level. And so we're going to get into that and what that means. So basically the idea being, just to recap, fret 0, the open string, and then fret 1, fret 3, open string right here, fret 2, fret 3, open string, fret 2, fret 3, and so on, rising up the strings. These are the equivalents in this diagram of notes on the guitar. But instead of having to memorize or learn what these different black dots mean, it's just much more straightforward. So that's the appeal of tablature and why a lot of people get sucked into that allure of tablature, when really it is, it's not a stepping stone up, it's actually a descent down. So what does that mean? So, or why is that a problem? Why is it a problem is the main question. So let's look at the structure of tablature and why it's a problem. So music notation and tablature are one and the same. Music itself is the audible convergence of space and time. So we're going to get a little far out here, but that is in essence what music is, and why it is ultimately so appealing is because it is this interesting blend of space and time. By that, I mean time is a little more straightforward. It's rhythm. It's a song progresses from beginning to end. There's a sequence to it. And so rhythm is time. The space of space and time is the intervals, or the musical or harmonic space or intervals between notes. Understanding that distance between different notes, the intervals or gaps between those tones, is the space of space and time. And while tablature does a decent job of illustrating time along this x-axis, as you progress from left to right, just as we read books in the Western world where we're reading from left to right, our eyes scan the page, tablature does that too. So that's intuitive. The depiction of space is where the real problem really unfolds. And it's the same with notation, but we're going to focus on tablature here. So with the problem with the depiction of space is we kind of show it on a y-axis in tablature, in that each string rises. So we have a low string up to a high string. So this is kind of like, that kind of makes sense. Like, the higher the string, the higher the note. That's kind of intuitive. So this would be our y-axis to totally geek out. And this is our x-axis, the horizontal axis. But where things start getting screwy is when you can, with the numbers basically. So the fret numbers. So we have 0, 1, 3. We're progressing from left to right through time, but this doesn't, even though this is kind of like the guitar, the different strings up here, the tuning pegs, and this is the body of the guitar down here. Each of these lines represents a string. It's not really like a guitar because you can't show different notes, different frets, like at the same time. So you have open string and then fret 1, fret 3. So this is kind of like space as well, going that way. Or you might even kind of think of it as a z-axis, where time is along the x, and space or intervals are along the y and along the z. So now it's even more complicated, more even confusing than notation, because notation, at least, is just pitch rises up and rhythm goes from left to right. But in tablature, it's even more convoluted because we have, again, the strings rising up and the notes are depicted on the same string. The notes meaning the different frets, the places where you press your finger. So that can be confusing. And with this view, it doesn't help you really wrap your head around the way that the fretboard is laid out, which is critical to understanding the guitar, understanding the pattern of notes on the strings and frets. Tablature only gets you up and running to actually press the notes, but when you start to try to dissect what is going on the fretboard, if this were a fretboard, it not only is confusing, it totally throws you a curveball and leads you down to detour that is, you're not going to come to real insights that way. So what does that mean? So let's look at an example of a song in tablature. So we can play this song on the 5th string with, 3, 3, 5, 3, and then the 4th string we have 2, and then 5th string 3, 5, 3, and you can play it. There's no background knowledge. There's no previous understanding needed. But looking at chords really starts to clarify where the issue with this space-time division of the plane comes in. And that is because chords are different note patterns with the notes played simultaneously. So simultaneously, a single instance of time, because the x-axis in tablature moves from left to right. So since all of these notes are played at the same time, they have to be stacked in tablature. And so we have, this is basically a C chord, an open C chord. So we're playing an open E note, and then C, and then an open G note or string, and then we have E, C. So that is a C chord. But because this 1 and this 2 and this 3 are all stacked on top of each other, it's not actually showing you how those notes are related on the different frets, like in an intuitive visual way. And likewise for a G chord, we can play, you can see, okay, that's the 3rd fret on the 1st string, and this is the 2nd fret on the 5th string, and the 3rd fret on the 6th string, and then these 3 strings have an open, that's a G chord. So again, it's just, people take issue with this phrase, but it's monkey see, monkey do, where you're just asking tablature, tell me what to do, tell me what to play. I don't want to understand. It's kind of what you're saying the more and more you play tablature, because it's just so easy. It's just, man, I can play those chords, get up and running, and maybe I'll figure it out later. Well, if you don't look further into it, that later doesn't come. So just to recap on that, there's a lot to cover here. So definitely stick with me because it's going to get cool. We're talking about the troubles of tablature, but once you get past the troubles of tablature, it like opens up and gets really, really cool. So tablature is, a division of space and time, where time is from left to right. Space or pitch is up and down on the strings, and kind of like, on the individual strings if you write the different fret numbers, because each string can go up and down as well, even as you move from left to right. So it's this confusing, convoluted system. And so if there ever was this feeling of like, what is it about tablature that is like kind of confusing? Like, why is it that it doesn't lead me to an understanding of the fretboard? It's because of that, because it doesn't actually depict the guitar as it really is. So if this was the headstock up here, this is the body down here, kind of looks like the guitar, but really the guitar is fully space. Like we have to divorce space from time to really understand the fretboard, and look at the fretboard as just a note pattern within the dimensions of space, forgetting about time for now. And so now we have on the actual fretboard an x-axis along the strings and a y-axis along the frets. And now we have both dimensions of space filling space, rather than, like I say, in tablature, where only a given sliver of time can you see space. So in tablature, it's almost like you're looking at a room through a keyhole or through the crack in a door. It's like you kind of get a sense, but it's like this warped funhouse view of space, of the fretboard at a given moment in time, because of how the x-axis is relegated to time. And so now we have to compress all of the pitches, all of the space of music into a vertical y-axis, which is warping our understanding of the fretboard. Whereas on the fretboard itself, we have the y-axis and the x-axis that are both available to understand space. Space, again, being the intervals between notes or the relationships between notes. And those relationships are the key to everything in music. Time is valuable and it's an essential part. Rhythm is really key to music, but it's really the relationships between notes, those intervals or gaps, the spaces between the notes, that inform scales and modes and chords and progressions. So it's funny because people want to jump in and get up to speed, as it were, with tablature, but ironically, it's like it's going too fast because you're introducing time too early. So to really understand the fretboard, I mean. So while music and songs need time, need the element of rhythm, if you want to understand the fretboard and understand music theory, you have to press the pause button on time, at least to begin, so that once you repress play, you have an understanding of music. It's almost like, you know, those scenes like in The Matrix where time slows down and, you know, the camera can do like a 360 around, you know, a given scene. It's because they're able to manipulate time and be able to like just take in the eternity of a single moment and then fly back into action. That's what it is with music theory. So we're going to do that with the fretboard. And just as one last illustration here, like you could, using black dots, you can see, okay, for example, this is a C note, this is a C note, this is a C note, C note, C note, C note. So these are different octaves of a C note. You could kind of try to replicate that in tablature. There's press the first fret of the second string, the third fret of the fifth string, and so on. Those are kind of showing the same thing, but again, this is a false depiction of tablature because of the way that time and space are depicted. And again, if you fill in all of the notes with just these uniform black dots, like you start to lose track of what you're looking at because all of these black dots are obscuring the underlying patterns. So this is a book that is actually really useful. The Guitar Grimoire. Grimoire is it's like a medieval term for book of magic. And it does seem like magic. If you don't understand theory, it can seem like magic. And the fact that they're playing up the fact that it feels like magic actually should be a warning sign that maybe this isn't the most intuitive way, because while music is ethereal and wonderful and amazing, music theory itself shouldn't feel like this dark magic that is like misty. So if you could go through page after page and just play different notes using black dots, but it's ironic that we're using, you know, monochromatic notes, monochromatic diagrams to depict notes of the chromatic scale. You know, it's like monotonous, but monochromatic in that these aren't actually illustrating the underlying patterns. So to get through that, we're actually going to we're going to transcend tablature. But as one last note here, tablature in essence is like painting by numbers, where, you know, this, you know, I can feel for an afternoon like Leonardo da Vinci and I can feel like I'm just painting the most amazing masterpiece of all time. But this is basically the equivalent of tablature for Stairway to Heaven. Like Stairway to Heaven is the quintessential play along, like, I learned the tab of Stairway to Heaven. But that too is ironic because it's not really an ascent to heaven, it's a descent into hell, because you never really understand the underlying theory if you're using tablature, which again is like painting by numbers. I know that sounds harsh, and if you're a fan of tablature, that can seem like a personal attack, which it's not. Again, the whole point of what I'm saying is in the context of wanting to understand music theory for songwriting, which, if we're all honest, songwriting is, I think, ultimately why anyone really picks up a guitar or any instrument, is to be able to express the music which is inside of them. Certainly, if you're watching a video like this, a channel about theory for songwriting, there must be some curiosity. And so that's again, to clarify the context, that's why I'm taking issue with tablature, because it's not going to get you, it's not the stairway to heaven, it's the descent into hell. And if you want to paint by numbers, you can, but it can only get you so far. And you're basically just recreating someone else's work. And in this case, it's a bad replica of Mona Lisa. All right. So what we're going to do is we are going to understand the fretboard next. We're going to understand this pattern a little better by letting go of the shackles of tablature, which can feel a little bit nerve-wracking to begin with, because again, it's presented as the ubiquitous option. Like, that's how you learn, unless you want to get into notation, and that could take years, and that's a pain. So what am I supposed to do? Well, the alternative is just to go straight to music theory, because music theory is what really explains things. And by using tablature to begin with, it keeps you from a lot of things. It keeps you from a lot of insights. And the next thing that it keeps you from seeing, or the next mistake that it creates, is ignoring that music is cyclical. Like with tablature, there ain't no way that you're going to see that music is inherently cyclical. And but it is. And once you see that music is cyclical, it really gives you insight into how things work. So I want to look at that a bit, because at first it seems like music is rectilinear. I mean, the fretboard itself is a rectangle. And so, because I just said we've got the y-axis and the x-axis, so isn't that a rectangle? What does this have to do with cyclical patterns? I have other videos here on the channel that talk about, and in the library, that talk about the cyclical nature of music. But just at a high level, if you're new to this, or as a refresher on what that means, how can we jam a round peg or cyclical theory into this square hole of the rectilinear fretboard? And it's actually awesome how it works. So there are three fundamental patterns of what I call the holy trinity of music theory. It's the chromatic scale, which is the basic 12 notes in music. Then you have the major scale, and then the circle of fifths. And all of these three patterns are basically like reincarnations of one another. They're all just variations of the same pattern. And so what that means is, let's start with these three patterns. And like I say, it's the holy trinity because they're different, like I say, incarnations or iterations of each other. So in this diagram, at the very center, we have the chromatic scale. So this inner ring, the center ring, is like all of the notes. So C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and then it repeats on C, C sharp, D, and so on. And then, going in a counterclockwise direction is the chromatic scale. So if we have the chromatic scale, so it's like, is that an okay volume? That's the chromatic scale, rising in a clockwise direction or falling in a counterclockwise direction. Then, through a series of whole steps and half steps, and this middle ring, we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That's the C major scale. And then if we start on the second half of the C major scale, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, we have the G major scale. So C major is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Start on the second half. So starting on G, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Starting on the fifth note of that pattern, we have D, E, F sharp, G. Whoops. A, B, C sharp, D. That is the D major scale, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, and so on. So if we continue this daisy chain pattern of interlocking major scales, we end up with 12 keys, C, G, D, A, E, and so on. So it's the circle of fifths. So in the center ring, we started with the chromatic scale. Then using intervals of whole steps and half steps, we get the major scale. And then every fifth note is the circle of fifths. So that's what I mean. They're just different variations or incarnations of the same underlying patterns. Now we're using black and white here, but using color, this is just another depiction of the same thing using color. And in other videos, I explain how this color is applied, but basically you apply the color wheel to the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, rearrange, or of the circle of fifths, rearrange the circle of fifths back into the chromatic scale, and then it cycles through the same patterns. And so by being able to see these patterns, it's a lot easier to see, oh, wow, music is cyclical. I mean, all of these patterns are cyclical. They loop into each other in this endless cycle. The chromatic scale, the major scale, all the major scales, and the circle of fifths. So that's cool, and could could end in the gee whiz file, like, oh, that's nice. But there is a practical application to this on the guitar in a really cool way, which is the fact that when we talk about the x-axis and the y-axis of the fretboard, the x-axis is the chromatic scale, and the y-axis is the circle of fifths. So the chromatic scale rises and falls along each string, and then the circle of fifths rises and falls along each fret. Now there's this shift between the top two strings, and I've gotten a lot of questions, a lot of comments about that seemingly all-important shift in this pattern. It's really, I mean, it's not that important. It's kind of a moot point, frankly, because it's consistent along every string. So the chromatic scale, all of these horizontal lines are chromatic scales, and then all of these vertical lines with that shift are circle of fifths sequences. And this, just in a nutshell, I'll do another video that explains this shift in more detail, but the circle of fifths shift along those top two strings. It's not that the pattern breaks down. If anything, it's amazing that it works with the human hand. This is meant to accommodate the ergonomics of our joints and our ability to play different patterns, different chords that and scales and modes that utilize a smaller gap here along these strings. So that's basically what it is. I'll dive into that in more detail, but in a nutshell, we have the space of music theory, the X and Y axes, that are informed by these cyclical patterns. So that's how we just jammed the circular or the round peg into the square hole of the fretboard. So the fretboard looks like it's just this rectangle, but the patterns themselves are informed by cyclical patterns. And again, if we were just working with tablature, this would be, it's kind of like if you've ever heard the story of Flatland. It was actually fascinating. It was like from the 1800s or something. This author that described, Carl Sagan talks about it in Cosmos, the like a three-dimensional being who appears in Flatland, or a land of two-dimensional beings, and the two-dimensional beings can't wrap their head around a third dimension. So a cube basically looks like a square in Flatland. And it's the same as if we tried to explain these things, the cyclical nature of the fretboard using tablature, it's laughable. It's like, how are you even going to do that? It's too much. It's you can't see it. But with color and with theory, you can. So that is, like I said, I'm just kind of glossing over some of the main points, but we're going further down the path that tablature can't take you, and this path, there are some beautiful views along this hike of theory, to use a hiking metaphor. So in this case, we have all of the notes of both the chromatic scale and the circle of fifths, which themselves are just rearrangements of one another. If we, just focus on a given major scale, for example, like C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, or all of these notes are adjacent neighbors in the circle of fifths, we get the notes of the C major scale and all of the relative modes that are permutations of that pattern. So we could play this in different octaves, and this is where octaves come in. So we could play, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C in these positions, or C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C in these positions. So just for fun, we've got, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C in this lower octave, or I'm going to play this upper octave. We have, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And this matrix, the fretboard matrix, is amazing because it's like showing us these cyclical patterns, but using different octaves. And I'm using the key of C a lot as an example, but for good measure, we can look at the key of G, and the same thing is true in the key of G. We've got a lower octave of G, a higher octave of G, or we could even find, an octave of G, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and play it up there. So it's like amazing that you can see these and play these different cyclical patterns along the fretboard. And that's why you can play different octaves and move around the fretboard, because it's informed by these underlying cyclical patterns. That's the key, is that music is cyclical. And once you understand that music is cyclical, then the fretboard starts seeming less daunting or less confusing. Like, why is it that every time my finger goes to this note, it happens to be a C, for example? Oh, it's because of that underlying matrix, or that interlaced framework of, interwoven patterns. Chromatic scale along the x-axis, circle of fifths along the y-axis. And again, we're not factoring in time right now. We've slowed time down to the point of freezing time so that we can just navigate space, like I said, in that scene of the Matrix, where we're just taking in the view, so that once we press play again, we can, you go from being a slow motion, Tai Chi artist to an ass-kicking Kung Fu fighter, because you understand space intimately once you dissect the fretboard like this. So that's the cyclical nature of music, but it gets even better. So it's cool to play scales, and we've played, the C major scale, we have the G major scale, and those are just two examples. This, of course, applies to all 12 keys of music, because in those earlier diagrams, you saw that music is cyclical, and so all 12 keys follow the same symmetrical patterns. So that's why you can play all of these patterns on the fretboard in every key, in all 12 keys. But something that music theory or that tablature obscures, the greater offense that it creates by keeping you from being able to see the next thing, is that music is fractal. And so, like, what does that mean? So, if you've ever seen like the Mandelbrot set, fractals are these infinitely scaling patterns where, you can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, and it's like a self-referential pattern where it's the same pattern at both the smallest micro level and the same pattern at the greatest macro level. It's just, it like keeps self-referencing itself. And I actually had a link that I was going to show, like a clip of this, but I don't have it pulled up. So if you don't know fractals, definitely Google it. It will blow your mind. And the fact that music itself is fractal is why it works the way it does. So let me just explain that again at a high level. I'll dive into these. If you're interested in any of these specifics, like if you want to talk more about the, the cyclical nature of music or the fractal nature of music, I can dive in deeper on that. But just from a high level, just kind of really driving it home, the trouble with tablature. Again, I began with the problems with tablature, and the problems are not just because it keeps you from understanding theory, but because it keeps you from really cool insights like these that are even like beyond theory. It's like how nature works. Like, to be able to see how music works is more than just because I want to write a cool song. It's like, wow, nature is amazing. So when I say that music is fractal, we talked about a moment ago the cyclical nature of music and how, we have the circle of fifths here and how it's this seamless, this seamless daisy chain pattern of interlocking scales, major scales. But every pattern, every scale has different permutations or different modes that are derived from those scales. So, and, using C as the example again, C Ionian is the C major scale, and C Lydian is a permutation of the G major scale, and C Mixolydian is a permutation of the F major scale, and so on. Like C Dorian is a permutation of the B flat major scale, and so on. So all of these neighboring modes in the circle of fifths inform a lot of how music is created. So looking at this in a table format, it's a little more straightforward. That we have the different parallel modes in the key of C. So we have, C Ionian. Talked about this actually in the live stream a little bit last time. So C Ionian, and then C Dorian is, this pattern C. So, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat, C is C Dorian, and then C Phrygian is C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, and so on. So we have all of these different parallel modes, and those parallel modes are actually derived from other major scales. So C Ionian is just itself, C Ionian. C Dorian is derived from the B flat major scale. So if we just played the B flat major scale, so for example, if we played, B flat, B, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat, if we started that pattern on C and ended on C, but kept that same interval pattern, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat, C. So that's what this is getting at, is B flat Ionian, or the B flat major scale, is the source of the C Dorian mode. And likewise, C Phrygian comes from A flat major, C Lydian comes from G major, C Mixolydian comes from F major or F Ionian, C Aeolian, or the C minor scale, comes from E flat major, and then C Locrian comes from the D flat major scale. All of these notes are neighbors in the circle of fifths. It's all of these notes over here are the source scales for those different parallel modes, with C being the example. So on the guitar, what does that mean? So it means that C major is just C Ionian, it's just itself. But if we took on the guitar, C Dorian, the C Dorian mode, it is the same pattern as B flat Ionian. So even though, here I'm highlighting B flat as the tonic, or as the, the central tone within this scale. And here I'm highlighting C as the central tone, or as the tonic in that. The two patterns are exactly the same. Like, these are the same pattern, because music is fractal. It's like self-referential, and it'll make more sense with a couple of examples here. So C Phrygian is another example. So C Phrygian on the guitar is the same as the A flat major scale. You're just beginning and ending on C, which gives it a different vibe, a different tone. And music keeps referencing itself at different levels because it's fractal. So a little more clearly, an example that shows that a little more clearly is if we took the C, or sorry, in this case, it's the F major scale. From F major, we can derive different, the F major scale, or F Ionian, we can derive 7 different chords. So in this case, it's F major, G minor, A minor, B flat major, C, D minor, and E diminished. Because those 7 chords are subsets. These 7 chords are subsets of the major scale, in this case, F major, which in turn, the major scale is a subset of the chromatic scale / circle of fifths. And then a chord progression might only select a couple of these chords to play a chord pattern that is a subset of the chords that were a subset of the scale, which is a subset of the chromatic scale and major scale. But the same underlying, like, gravitational harmonic relationships, the geometric relationships at the heart of it, informing notes at every level permeate the different micro and macro levels of patterns. So we have, harmonic geometric relationships that inform the chromatic scale, and those carry over and are imbued into the major scale, which those same harmonic gravitational relationships are imbued into the chords, which are in turn imbued into the chords of a chord progression, which gives the flow and structure and gravitational direction of a song, which in turn makes an album what it is. So it's almost like if you look at music in the physical world as, atoms are combined into molecules, are combined into compounds, are combined into larger structures. It's the same with music and harmonic relationships. And to be able to see those relationships within the context of space on the fretboard, which is cyclical and ultimately fractal, is made possible by eschewing tablature and really embracing music theory. So, a little bit ago, I said that, it might kind of feel like nerve-wracking to let go of tablature because it's presented as the ubiquitous source of being able to play music. Like, if I don't have tablature, what am I going to do? Well, you have theory, and theory explains things so much more clearly. Even if I'm not as articulate as I'd like to be, or as fluid as I'd like to be here, those patterns are there. And so definitely check out the diagrams in the library if you haven't, because you can take this in at your own pace and even pause me as the pace car on soaking this in, and just soak it in at your own pace, because that's what it's about, is to be able to pause time and look at music theory within the context of space, because that's what it comes down to. And then once you're able to see all of these cyclical fractal patterns, you can play the guitar informed by all of these cyclical and geometric and fractal relationships that guide you in the process of songwriting, which is not possible if you start with tab, because that's where you're going to end, is with tab. I've never known anyone to really go beyond tab to like create amazing music that they themselves understand or could explain to others. Maybe they're out there and they're like prolifically insightful and can see through the warping of space and time to understand the fretboard. But I would imagine that their understanding of the fretboard came through practice of the fretboard. Maybe the tablature got them up and running almost like training wheels on a bicycle, but then they were able to balance it out and keep writing. But it's really theory that informs everything from scales and modes to chords and progressions to come up with your own songs, because that's what it's about. All right. I've geeked out a lot, and that was kind of the gist of what I want to talk through. And I've been seeing comments come through and I haven't addressed them. So before I close out, I want to speak to any comments or questions that you have. So I'm just kind of scrolling through here really quick to see if there are any questions. Rick McCarger, you said most guitar players have zero intention of becoming musicians. They just want to learn a few of their favorite songs. Millions of guitars sold every year. There will not be millions of pros. Yeah, and professional songwriting is different than songwriting. It's for me, it's an expression to write songs. I mean, even the pros do this ultimately in the beginning, and maybe they lose their passion, but I've got to think, and I'm from everything I do myself and what I speak with other musicians about, is that it's about expression. And tablature is like the ultimate constipation of creative expression, because you keep it bottled in. You can't fully express yourself. And so theory is like, to carry that metaphor through, like the laxative of creative expression. And so I think a lot of people are buying guitars. I actually read an article by, I think it was the Gibson CEO. It was from a couple of years ago. And he was talking about how, Taylor Swift was helping lots of people, lots of young ladies buy guitars because they wanted to be like her. And it felt so dismissive of him and so disconnected from his audience to, or, you know, from the people who were like paying him money to create something that helps them connect with music and creativity, to ultimately miss the point that they aren't just trying to be like Taylor Swift. They're inspired by Taylor Swift to create their own music. I think that's the case. If we're really honest with ourselves, I think that is definitely the case for most people. Is, yeah, they might not be looking for a record label, you know, to sign with a record label to release albums, but to be able to just like get the songs in their head out, definitely, I think, is what it's about. Let's see. So let me pull up this comment here. So Richard, you said the experience I've had with tab is that the treble clef is always, it looks like it didn't show the whole thing. But yeah, the treble clef is I have some diagrams in lesson 12, actually in lesson 10, that show how tablature, or how the strings correlate with notation. If you are interested in notation, I don't promote notation because it has its own problems, and I'll do another video about that. Many of them are the same in terms of its warping depiction of space and time. But yeah, tablature can have, like I say, it gets you up and running quick, but it also gets you falling and skinning your knee just as quickly. Let's see. So this was a little bit older, the comment, but Supertonic, it just doesn't tell you time values, but it's more than that. If you were following along with what I was showing in terms of tablature, the X and Y axis of tablature, that it also warps the depiction of space, of intervals and notes on the fretboard. And that is really the problem. It would be nice if it showed time values a little more like notation, but it actually is more insidious than that in terms of the way that it confuses intervals and relationships, which again are at the heart of music theory. Intervals and relationships are what inform scales and modes and chords and progressions. And if you want to create your own music in an informed way and in a satisfying way that doesn't feel like you're just groping in the dark, then theory is the way to go. Let's see. So I'm looking at comments here. Any questions? So Richard Hall, you said E minor over B equals what Roman numeral? That's a good question, and it does depend on the key and mode that you're in. So to look at this, for example, in the key of C, if you had an E minor chord, it's the minor 3 chord in that key in C Ionian. But, you know, if let's switch it up and say that we're in the key of C Lydian, it's still an E minor chord, or a minor 3. But let's say we change the key instead and we go into G. In the key of G Ionian, E minor becomes the 6th chord. So it really does depend on, and just for good measure, let's go into the key of D. D Ionian, it's E minor is the minor 2 chord, or, you know, we can play in various keys and modes. So E minor could be a 2. In these examples, it could be a 3, a 6, or a 2, depending on the context. But it basically is the /B is just playing a B in the lowest note. So, you know, you have a B. So it's an E minor chord with a B in the bass position. The B doesn't mean it's the root note. It's still an E minor, but with B as that lowest sounding note. On a piano, that'd be the second inversion of B. Cool, Dave Mercer. Thank you on the explanation. I'm glad that it helps, because music theory can be daunting, especially if you can't quite picture it. And that's the thing too with music, is that it can feel like being visual is a disadvantage in an auditory art form like music. But it turns out that music theory means to see sound by definition. And if you can truly see sound, then what started as a weakness, being visual, ends up being a strength. which is really cool. Let me just jump into some of these last notes. So I've been working on in the course lesson 12, working busily behind the scenes, and so that is going to be ready and released in July sometime. So and we're very close to July, so I'm excited. I'll be talking more about it as it comes up, but it's about the layers of music and how the different layers of a song are interwoven to compose, songs. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And the in terms of the lesson 12, lessons 1 through 11 of the course are, and this is in the library, there's a link, or will be a link in the video notes, talking about lessons 1 through 11 are talking about, the fundamentals of music, the geometric relationships of notes and intervals, which most people, including myself in the beginning, totally overlooked, totally discounted as not being necessary. But they are fundamental and inform. They're the foundation of everything in music. And then part 2 builds on that with chords. And then part 3 talks about time, the element of time in music, and dismantles notation and tablature as well, to be able to transcend those limiting factors in understanding music to get into composition. And so part 3, or part 4, lesson 12 is in part 4. That's what I'm going to be releasing this lesson 12 in July. Parts 1 through 11 took a long time, took years to create, because I was working on it behind the scenes before I was putting out videos and doing social media and all of that. So I was very focused on doing that. And now that I'm, to use the vaudeville metaphor of spinning multiple plates, as I'm spinning, live streams and videos and content in the library and all of that good stuff, I'm allocating time differently than I did before, where it was just a total focus on just the course. But all that to say, lesson 12 is coming out very soon. This chord map that I talked about in the last live stream and used a little bit here, these have the press proofs on the next batch that are looking really good. They came in last week. And so that's where we're at, because I know they're currently sold out in the shop. And so I've had some comments and questions about that. So we're looking at having them available again in the shop in the early part of July. So definitely be on the lookout for that. And I'll be talking about it as well as it comes. And one last little housekeeping item in terms of if you're coming to us from different parts of the globe. I'm in the United States. We have musicians in different countries, and we've had the global shipping closed for the last couple of weeks. But we've been resolving some issues with carriers. When we released the chord map on the first round, it was definitely a learning curve in terms of global shipping and logistics, and all the things that come up in terms of taxes and addresses and all of that fun stuff. So as we're wrapping our arms around that, we'll be opening up to global. I mean, music theory is and songwriting is really why I've gotten into this in the beginning, and why I keep doing it, because that's the passion. And having stuff like this in the shop is not the first why I'm doing it. They're made available to facilitate teaching, to facilitate engaging with music theory and making it, tactile and actionable. And so, just spinning a lot of different plates. But I'm excited to have this stuff available and lesson 12 coming out very soon. So that is tablature, the problems with tablature in a nutshell. If you find tablature doing the job for you, that's fine. At some point, there's the inevitable, what if I could do this? Or what if I understood that? And that's where music theory is waiting for you to give you an amazing experience, because music theory is amazing, like everything else in nature. Let's see. So I'm just looking through the comments here. Cool, Dave, you have your chord map and you love it. I love to hear that. The feedback's been really good, and I have another video coming out this week about application of the chord map with some really cool chord progressions and song examples. And yeah, that is basically the trouble with tablature in a nutshell. So thank you for joining, and thank you for your comments. I love to engage, like I say, to geek out with fellow musicians on the art and science of songwriting. So if you've ever had your friends tell you that tablature is the way to go and tablature is good enough, now you have a little bit more to articulate why it's a problem, why it's a limiting factor, and it gets so much cooler than tablature. Tablature, is what it is, and there's a cool world beyond that. So thank you for joining, and we'll be doing this again very soon. So we will talk soon, and have a great rest of your day. We'll see you.